All right. Thank you all for joining. We've tried to give everybody plenty of time to jump on. The topic is pocket listings unveiled in the future of clear cooperation. By the way, we have a lot of people who watch later, so we will be sending out the recording if you want to send it to members, groups, whatever, because we've had that request before. The rules of Masterclass are that this is not an infomercial. We'll take it for as long as it goes. We are, of course, always respectful of one another. I don't have skin in this game, so I'll be interested. I'm always here to learn. And feel free to ask any questions or comments in the chat. Okay, our participants are Mr. Dwiggins. A lot of people don't know you, so I'll introduce you as the CEO of NextHome. So thank you, James, for joining us. Appreciate it. Mike Hickman, also appreciate it. CEO of Seven Gables, big brokerage in California. Liz Sturrock, who's the chief of MLS and innovation at Miami. Some of you have been repeat offenders with me, which means something's wrong with you. And Jeff Hickey, who's the vice president of technology at the KW Go Group, and is my new buddy. So appreciate that for joining on. All right, we did a prep call on this, and we really tried to make sure that we talk about this in a cohesive construct. So I've organized it a little bit so we just don't get into a free for all, which is let's start with the history of clear cooperation. So I think I'm going to do it from two perspectives, the MLS perspective and then the broker franchise perspective. I'm going to ask Liz to represent on the MLS. Thank you. I appreciate Liz. And then James, you gave me a good history of T3. I know you thought I wasn't listening because I had a drink in my hand, but I was. And so I'm going to ask you to repeat that history. But again, let's keep it to the history before we go further than that. So Liz, I'm going to ask you to jump in first, if that's okay.
Sure. I mean, so listen, pocket listings aren't a new concept. They've been around for a long time. But I think what really brought it to the forefront is a few years ago, one of the MLS CEOs got up at a meeting and said he was seeing a real shift in the market, that 30% of his listings in his market were coming up as pocket listings. And I think that that really kind of forced the hand of the MLS committee to say, listen, we need to make sure that we have all the data in the market. Now, you can make all of the arguments about why they said that, right? Was it to protect the small brokers, to protect the people who weren't getting all of the listings? Was it to make sure that there's great data? Was it a fair housing issue? We're all going to sit here and unpack all those reasons today. But that was really the impetus, right? Was, somebody standing up and saying a third of my market has gone away and is sitting in somebody else's computer and it's not being shared.
Okay, and that was at the MLS meeting, right? And I think Jeff, you said you were at that meeting as well. Is that right?
No, I wasn't. Our broker was, and I had discussions with her about it, and she shared the same perspective.
Okay, so that story is accurate. Okay, good. Thank you. James?
Well, I was not at that meeting, but I'm 99% certain she's referring to Jim Harrison at MLS Listings.
Yep.
And that's my market. So yeah, I mean, I'll kind of summarize it. Basically, 30% of the inventory in Silicon Valley, California was off market, being held by two brokerages where they were telling sellers that we can take your property off market, don't have to show it, don't need to do open houses, don't need to have people coming through the home. We'll sell it internally. If we can't do that, we'll put it back on the market. And they were double-ending deals, basically trying to figure out a way to do deals internally to make that happen. What people aren't getting in this conversation, because people haven't done the history, was all the lawsuits that ensued after by sellers who felt they were harmed by the practice when they were seeing houses that were identical to the ones that were held off market selling for $500,000 more 6 months later. And so I'm not going to name the companies, but those two companies got sued for the very practice that we're going to talk about today. Not to mention, the biggest problem was if you were another company and you found out about the listing, for example, they wouldn't do anything with you. Unless it was being handled internally, they would shy you away, or in many cases, the managers would say, if you come work at our company, you'll have access to this inventory. I remember it vividly. To be clear, this is literally my market. I live in Silicon Valley. So it's started with that. And what ended up happening was small brokerages, franchisors, And candidly, buyers and sellers were being screwed by this practice. And so it became a big discussion because buyers had no idea what was for sale. You didn't know unless you went to those companies' websites because it wasn't on the major portals. In some cases it was, in some cases it wasn't. We can talk about that. But it ended up being a disaster for the way the real estate community operated in this particular market. And that was the precipice of CCP being discussed and figured out. It's not from the MLS necessarily losing market share. It's because the practice was screwing the real estate community and buyers and sellers in the market. I remember I was running one of the largest companies in the Bay Area at the time. So
Oh, thank you for that. That's helpful and I appreciate it. And it good, the local aspect is interesting. So so now we now understand a little bit of where CCP kind of has come into play. Who raised it, what happened, etc. And then I guess it was a big issue and NAR took hold of it, right? And it did pass pretty easily, I would say, Liz and James. I don't have this on the prep form, but
majority of
just
the board voted.
It
okay.
was, and it was one of those things where there was a lot of discussion beforehand, right? In the, whether it was in the press, whether it was in the lobby bar, whether it was in conference rooms, and certainly not Zoom calls, because this was a long time ago, but WebEx calls, but it ended up passing, right? It ended up passing with,
overwhelmingly.
overwhelmingly.
I think there was a tiny percentage that was dissenting. It was like overwhelmingly the board of directors passed it.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Then I will move to the next section of this conversation, which is really, we're assuming it was not up for contention, okay, today. If we go to like Jeff and Mike, say this whole thing, will both either go away or hadn't come up, and where does that leave us? Like, I mean, how does it work for you with your business? You're both, with brokerages on the brokerage side. And same for you, James, but I really want to go a little more local, right? With Jeff and Mike in terms of how do you deal with it today? I pulled this topic and you're like, why are you talking about it? So how does it work for you today? Because candidly, it came up with me in a conversation with a big producer up in your neck of the woods, James. And I don't know why it came up in a conversation, but I was like, how many pounds? She's like, oh, a huge percent. And then I ended up asking at Inman last year, MLS execs, do you find, how do you find out? And it just became interesting to me. So it's actually been a thought to me of that is this just sort of quietly dealt with. So yeah, while there's maybe no problem with it really in truth, and it's the right thing to do, again, I have no opinion, but people are dealing with it. It is a reality. It is, whether we do anything about this from here or not, it is a broker's reality. So Jeff, Mike, who wants to go first?
I'll jump in.
Okay.
We have 14 offices and 10 in Dallas-Fort Worth area, 3 in New Mexico, and 1 in Tennessee. And so we deal with it really on a localized level in all 3 of those markets. One of the things that we have found is that it's become a competitive issue for the brokerages as well, because today the brokerages that really tout their activity in that space have been recruiting away our agents. And we actually had to take a look at that and offer something to them that they, to keep those agents and then attract additional agents so we grow the brokerage. So we do have a solution that we use for off market. We call it private collection. And it is something that we actually make use of. We abide by the rules. It's got guardrails in it, so we're not marketing outside of our domains, and we're taking things off there for periods of time, making sure when they go on MLS, we take it off there and everything. But fundamentally, the concept and the history was real important. So thank you all for sharing that. But the history has been very interesting to understand more of, because at the end of the day, while we all compete with each other, I think we all have a vested interest in the survival of our industry. And so it's important that we do respect those different opinions, because it doesn't make sense to over compete and then suck all the all the activity out of the industry. So I don't know what the answer is, but I do believe that the actual execution of the solution needs some work. And so, we have a lot to focus on around that. We do make use of a product for our agents, but it's something we do on a localized basis, and we manage it pretty closely so that it doesn't, people aren't abusing it.
And I think that raises an interesting question of, and that's why we structured this call this way, which is we know why it was put in place, but and I'll segue this to you, Mike, but has the industry changed, the climate changed, the inventory shortage, recruiting models, like, or are we just want to change it and we're giving reasons for it? But has it really changed, to necessitate, to Jeff's point, that we do business a little differently?
I totally think there's been a shift, Audrey, and I think there's been a shift in the industry. And I think what's missing from this entire conversation is what does the consumer think and what's in the best interest of the consumer. I understand where James is coming from. Yeah, we can do all this, but the bottom line is the consumer doesn't have a voice. I believe the consumer really doesn't know that much about CCP, and I think NAR has done a very poor job of telling people what it is. I'm for the repeal of CCP. I think it should be repealed and replaced with policies that are either local, that make more sense for the consumer, and protect fair housing. I'm 100% behind fair housing. And I think for a national trade association to make a one-size-fits-all policy across this entire country that everybody should be dedicated and committed to enforcing, but then the people in the MLS have to enforce this, right? Like I have agents who, for example, here's a perfect example of the failure of CCP. I have an agent who respected the policy completely. So it is due to go on the market. They put it on the market within 24 hours. And what they did is called a sign up. So the sign goes up on the property. Seller calls and says, "Hey, my daughter is sick. I can't show the property." And he tries to get the sign down. Somebody reports him and he has to pay $2,500. Where in the world does that fit into being fair for fair housing? Where does it fit in to protect agents? Where does that fit into the consumer benefiting from that? I don't think it's right that NAR has any business, okay, having a policy nationwide that covers every single aspect of everything that we could possibly do as a company and as agents, and then having the MLSs be the sheriff. I think that's terribly wrong. And I think the consumer should have a voice in this. And we're talking about, I would really question the fact, is everybody really informed the consumer what CCP is? And have they been surveyed to say, do I get a choice in this? And why doesn't the seller have a choice in what I understand they can have pocket listings or exclusive listings, pardon me. And I understand that is an option and there are guardrails with that. Okay, but I'm more interested in what the consumer wants and why are we not more consumer centric instead of agent centric?
Okay, so before I light that bomb off, I'm
I
gonna,
just put it up there.
because that's a good one. And that is the crux of it, let's face it. I've been
It
reading nonstop reading articles and we all are pointing to the consumer, right? And look, it's always a bit of a quandary. We are the leadership of the industry and we're trying to make decisions for, in effect, let's face it, for consumers. And yet our clients, so consumer versus client, right? Consumers are buying houses, clients are our agents, members, right? So we're trying to make it fair and even for everybody. I want to talk about one other thing to Liz real quick. Um, Liz, we touched with this a little bit, and Mike touched on it. There's an issue also with regionalization on this.
Yeah.
Right?
So,
I mean, it's like,
to respond to Mike, like in our
yeah,
market, seller opt-out has always been a thing.
It's an
And it has,
all-insurance market.
right. So I mean, for, our market here is varied widely, right? We have members who do rentals of low income properties, and we have members who sell $30 million homes on Fisher Island and everywhere in between. And if someone wants to do a seller opt-out for not allowing advertising, or maybe they allow it on the MLS, but they don't do okay to advertise, or they don't syndicate. Okay. All of those choices are available to them. So you can offer clear cooperation, but also honor seller opt-out. And there's many, many reasons, right? We have people who are officers, federal agents, judges. There are, really specific domestic violence laws where you have to protect everybody's privacy. So there's, seller opt-out is a real option to keep and still honor the spirit of clear cooperation.
yeah, it is the variety. It is yeah, I'm going to you, James. Hang on. But it is the regionalization that's such an issue. Sorry, go ahead, James.
It's not really an issue.
Okay.
Every MLS that I know of, and Liz can explain this, I have 25 seller informed opt-out forms in my inbox. I literally asked a bunch of MLS execs to send it to me. They're all identical. Basically, you have to inform the seller send it into the MLS. There's some different procedural changes on how it's done or not, but then they opt out. CCP has no relevance to it. The seller can opt out if they want. What they can't do then is get those properties on Zillow or Homes.com or Realtor, because they pull those from the MLS feeds. That's the crux. I'm just gonna circle this to like the fundamental part. Then Mike and I are friends and we always debate, etc. So
Everybody's friends. We're all
yeah,
good.
so Jeff mentioned this comment in the opening part. Like, let's just call it what it is. If we want to have a real conversation about what's going on here, Jeff said that brokers were using it as a competitive advantage. It was the first opening line that he said in his comments, meaning his competitors are using it as a way to recruit people away from him, which is what he also said. The whole reason that people want to get rid of CCP is so that brokerages can go have a competitive advantage over others. And to Mike's comment, that's not consumer friendly. That has nothing to do with the buyer and seller. Every single seller I've ever spoken to in the 44 years I've been on this planet, because both my parents and grandparents were brokers and ran companies, the seller's most important thing that they want is to sell their house for the highest price possible. 1% of them are like, yeah, I have the income to not have showings and privacy, and to Liz's comment, other situations. But the real issue this is coming up is because it's a shitty real estate market. It's been that way for 2 years. There's not a lot of people that are selling houses. Everyone's trying to figure out how to get deals through. Recruit agents, increase productions, how every real estate brokerage makes money. The end. And so this whole debate's coming up from one individual who's bringing this front and center because they're trying to figure out how to create increased profits and stock price. Like, that's just what this is about. 2 years ago, nobody was talking about CCP because everybody was making tons of money. So my whole problem with this conversation in general is that if we're genuinely talking about what's good for sellers, you can say, look, script one, we're going to hold it off market. We're going to sell it internally. We won't have to do any open houses. We're not going to have any showings. I'll work internally with it. We might even lower the commission amount. We'll double in the deal. It makes it easier. And the seller goes, that sounds great. So they're going to go, let's go that path. The other path is, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, the greatest marketplace ever developed on planet Earth is the MLS. It's better than every other country, which is why every country is trying to copy it. You're going to get 220 million unique views on Zillow, Homes.com, and Realtor. If it's not in the MLS, your property won't be on any of those websites, and we're going to reduce the number of people that will be able to see it. Which script do you think the seller, if they heard either of those two options, is going to want to do? Door number two, because they're going to go, I want to sell my house for the highest price possible. This whole debate is occurring because the market sucks and everyone's trying to figure out how to make money. The market turns, no one's going to talk about it again.
I think there's some truth to that. I was talking to an agent friend of mine. I do think this is a little bit of going back to dual agency. Like the broker comp rules really hurt. I do think personally hurt dual agency and brokers having a little bit more of a hand in dual agency.
If you ask a seller one question, if you use this number, and I've talked to 7 MLS execs, 5 of which have done private studies that aren't public, 2 of which are, on the amount of money a seller loses off market versus on MLS. If you do the math and say, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, this is what your house is worth. This is potentially the amount of money that you could lose. As soon as they see the number, because I just tested this, I asked a bunch of people selling their house, they're like, I don't want to lose that much money. Immediately they go, no, I don't. I want it. I want $28,000 to $50,000 more.
But the broker makes more money. So Jeff, just only because you got called out a little bit, but I know you can handle it. And somebody asked that you speak up, that was having a hard time hearing you. So you saw that. Okay, good.
Well, yeah, I adjusted the volume, so hopefully everybody can hear better. But
yeah, you can turn it down even. That was a little
okay.
Okay, we're good. Okay, go ahead, Jeff. Jump in.
Yeah, so I hear all this, and I mean, again, I'm not 100% against the CCP. But I do believe that it is not serving the purpose as it was intended. And as far as brokerage competition, it is a reality, and we can't ignore that. I mean, I can't, if I ignore it too much, I go out of business. And so it is a reality, but that doesn't mean that we continue to keep necessarily poorly implemented policies in place that actually are going to continue to exacerbate those issues.
The issue is office exclusives, Jeff. That's the reason we're having this discussion.
Yes.
The carve-out issue of office exclusives is the reason why that's occurring. If that wasn't there, you wouldn't have this competitive disadvantage.
Okay, I'm gonna go to Mike.
I'm willing to take that on. I'm willing to sell
Yes.
somebody on an office exclusive basis because I know my agents, I know how talented they are, and they can compete with some of the bigger companies. I'm not worried about that. Look, they're just for fun. 1,000 Watt did a survey and they asked, I forget how many, but it was, let's call it 1,000 home buyers. They asked them, what does MLS stand for? And it was even 36, 37% each. One said Major League Soccer, and the other one said multiple listing service. So the consumer is obviously ill-informed about what goes on. That's not a personal foul. That's a reality. Rick and Brian will support that 100% because it was astonishing to me that, and I've talked about this many times, that they don't know what the MLS even represents. No offense, Liz, because I know there's tremendous value. And I know, look, Art Carter is a really good friend of mine, and I did a podcast. I love that guy. He's a great guy. Okay. And CRMLS is the largest MLS in the country. So to be able to sit down with him, come to our office, sit down into our video studio and do a podcast with him was a real treat. And I asked him some really detailed questions and he came up with some great answers. So I respect that guy, as you know, James, and as you know, Audrey. And I think when he tells me that there's 100,000 members and 58% of them sold one house or less in the MLS, that begs the question of, does it really have to be distributed more? Does it really calculate that the more eyeballs see it, the better house you get or the higher price you get? To your point, James, I think you are correct that if that's what a seller does want. The question is not, for me, the question is not how do you carve these things out? The question is how do you write a better policy that works for our markets? Because the CCP has forced agents underground. This CCP has backfired so badly that it is forcing agents during the registered process to sell properties. There's got to be a better way. And other than having over 800 or 900 people on a board of directors, for God's sakes, most of whom come from smaller brokerages that want to evil out the playing field. Okay, I get that part. Okay, but let's be real here. You've got to get this policy straight. You can't find people because of the situation that I described earlier. Pocket listings, as you point out, Liz, and as you point out, James, are you have guardrails, and you can do that. Okay, the fact about agents and stealing agents, if you want to try to steal my agents, go for it. I'm not worried about it. You're not going to put me out of business because it's in my market. The companies you're referring to aren't number 2 or they're not number 3. They're down the list and we're number 1 or number 2 in most of those markets. So I'm not worried about it. And I have no axe to grind with trying to withhold my listings. I just want a better policy in place that makes sense for the consumer and makes sense for us as agents.
Okay, before you go, James, let me give it to Liz. I know, I'm gonna ask you to pause for 3 seconds because I do think I want to hear it, but I know you've got a strong rebuttal. But Liz, from an MLS perspective, since the MLS has got called out here a little bit, and as you represent all MLSs, isn't lucky you.
I did not call out the MLS.
No, not the MLS. No, just sorry.
Just the committee, right?
Yeah,
right?
so
We're
just joking, Mike.
Right? We all serve at the pleasure of our members, right? And we're all here working as an NAR, right? MLS. We're not even owned by the association. We are part of the association. We're not a separate corporation. So we're governed by those NAR rules and regulations. Okay. And so we have to follow those policies. But what's your question, Audrey?
My question is this about the MLS? Sorry, Mike, you did not call out. I was being facetious, but is this about MLSs protecting their value proposition? Like, is this somewhat, I'm obviously a big fan of the MLS, but is this too much power? Can we circle back to the MLS getting to decide? You had mentioned on the prep call comp only sales, and which was super interesting to me. I had to go look that one up. And things like that. But is this about, is it about the consumer or is it about the MLS? Like, if you really take a step back, and I am objective, like,
so I think,
which stakeholder has the biggest skin in the game in a way, aside from the consumer?
Well, I can't speak to what every MLS does and how every MLS
of course not.
Rules and regulations, but I will say for us at Miami, our MLS rules and regulations, we start with what NAR has said. These are what the basics are. But then the things that you're able to do in your own market, those decisions are made by our board, right? It's made by our residential board of governors, our Broward board of governors, and our
which are brokers usually.
brokers and agents, right? Of varying sizes. Some of them are franchisers, some of them are small boutique brokerages, some of them work for some of the large guys and the companies that we're seeing on stage. Okay. And we listen to all of those, and they collectively, work together to decide what's best for the market. And, listen, you have to be very careful about what's antitrust and what's not, because we have competitors coming together and making decisions. Right. And so we have to be very
100%.
careful about how we talk about that. But I really don't want you to think that Liz sits in her office, or the other MLSs execs sit in their office and go, how can I make the brokers' lives more difficult? Nobody's trying to do that, right? We are all trying to serve the consumer, serve the agents, and serve the brokers all together to help make sure that there's an efficient marketplace where everybody here can thrive, right? We want the consumers to get the most money for their properties as well. We want everybody here to be successful. And I don't think all of those things have to be mutually exclusive.
Okay, James, let it rip.
I don't actually disagree with Mike on some of his stuff. I mean, I know Mike, and we've had many a drink and conversation. There's obviously a lot of issues with NAR and a lot of issues with policies. I don't disagree with him on that. There's a lot of things that need to be fixed over there. We can 100% agree on that. What I haven't heard from anyone is, what policies do you want changed? And that's the issue. So when I'm having discussions with people who are talking to the Department of Justice, who's realizing that the actual problem with CCP is office exclusives, to be clear, that's actually turning the other way now when they actually understand what the policy is. This whole thing, when we have to decide basically what we want as an industry. When we say we're for the consumer, then we need to just sit down and actually have that discussion. But I just think it's just half inflated nonsense, because to Kim's point, we're trying to, the MLS's job is to take care of the agents, the brokers, the consumer. That's too many conflicting people. Like, they all have different interests when you've got money involved in the debate. If we genuinely want to make it easy for the consumer to have a choice, which is where Mike and I can agree on, I'm a free market guy, totally am, then it's really simple to me. I think if you get rid of CCP, I think it's bad. I think you're going to find that what will happen is you're going to see large brokerages get bigger. You're going to see all of these companies hold back inventory. Everybody's agents at other companies won't have access to it. It will create a marketplace that will take us back 20 years minimum. And it will be horrendous for the consumer. And by the way, before I go to the positive here, what do you think Zillow or Homes.com is?
Oh, that you'll jump ahead. That's my next topic.
Fine, we'll talk about that in a second. Let me go the other way with it. CCP, if you're a member of the MLS and you're agreeing to cooperate, which is what it's about, to be clear, if the DOJ is listening, cooperate proactively and pro-consumer, so that we're actually sharing information to make sure the consumer is benefiting from it. The issue with this whole thing, because what Jeff started with is to be competitive against other companies, it's the office exclusives carve out. Get rid of that, and then simply take the seller opt-out, which they haven't, as far as I know, Liz, every MLS has it. I don't know of an MLS that doesn't at this point, and I'm in 400 of them. Make that opt-out form a little bit clearer, so that it's, here's the disadvantages or advantages, whatever you want to do. But there's, on all the forms I have in my inbox, there's a few things missing. It doesn't specifically say that you won't be on Zillow, Realtor, and Homes.com, which I think if the seller knew that, they'd be like, what? Number two is it doesn't tell them what the approximate price is that they would lose in that benefit. If you do that, I'm fully in favor of it. Have it so the seller can choose that. In Mike's case, they want to do it internal within 7 Gables. They want to do their own thing. They're clearly informed, and I'm going to make this statement not to irritate everybody, but I'm going to call it a fact. They're not going to be steered by the agent by telling the seller something that is not accurate, and then they make that choice, because they will listen to what their agent says.
So,
Okay, I'm going to pass it to Jeff.
yeah,
I
so
do think
for
it's a
that,
bit, there's
I-
some presumptive stuff in there. Go ahead, Jeff.
there's a significant amount of presumptive stuff in there, and let me be clear. Because I've been called out on it now 3 times. I did mention a reality about competitiveness and the broker's issues. It is a reality. I don't recall saying that was our primary motivation for doing it, but it was a big piece of it, and it is. I mean, I'm not ashamed of that. That was a reality we were dealing with, and it's still a reality for many.
Everybody is.
Okay, it's still a reality for many shops. We can't ignore that. The other piece that I'm concerned about is making the broad statement that 99% plus of sellers want to make the most money. 20 years ago, 15 years ago, everybody said the same thing, and nobody in their right mind were able to bet on Open Door coming to fruition in the marketplace. Today, consumers do make a decision to take less money for a more expedient transaction. It's not widespread, but it's almost 2% of the market on a national basis. So what my organization focuses on is optionality for the consumer, and that's really where we're coming from with it, is to make the optionality for the consumers to be able to decide for themselves what they want to do. I appreciate the MLS carve-outs and the MLS ability to actually allow sellers to opt out of things. But why does a seller have to opt out of something? Why can't they automatically make decisions for themselves and come at it from the other angle? And I just think the opting out part is not respectful of the consumers themselves. They need to be able to make those decisions, and we need policies that can address that.
Okay, so I'm gonna open up the next can of worms that is on
Can
the
I just say
list.
something, Audrey, just before
Yes,
you open?
please, do it.
I think there's a couple of things in there. Number one, I'm going to go back and repeat what I said before. If you repeal the CCP and replace it with certain policies that actually can have a positive effect on what James and Jeff and Liz are talking about, that is
Absolutely.
entirely possible. NAR should not have the power to dictate across this entire country. I do not believe in that. A policy that is one size fits all. There are policies that need to be put in place. For example, most of us use a digital signing process on listings, okay? I don't know about you guys, but I know my agents, and again, I love my agents and they're super smart, but sometimes when they send those things digitally, or their TCs do, what does a buyer, or in this case, a seller, do when they sign a listing agreement? We use a pen and paper before, okay? What does it do? It goes right to that initial sign.
So
They're not
interesting,
made
Mike.
They're not made to stop and read what is in
That's
the
so
darn
interesting.
agreement, which really pisses me off because it puts us in the position of liability for not explaining these things thoroughly enough, okay? That
Yeah,
is
that's so interesting.
one thing that needs to be fixed. And to James's point, if you want to put something in kind of an opt-out agreement or in a listing agreement in our forms, put it in there. But don't list percentages of what, I disagree with you, James, on that of how much they're going to lose, because there's no way to forecast that. You have to look at price ranges, geography, demographics, and all those things to get that. That would be
You
wrong.
need a local expert for that. Okay, that was my shameless plug. Go
That's
ahead.
absolutely right. And I just want to say one more thing and toss it out there. Look, before CCP came into effect 4.5 years ago, what the hell did we do in this industry? It was okay. We didn't have this issue.
Yeah, we
What
did.
happened? What?
That's exactly what we did. It was started
Oh,
in Silicon
no.
Valley.
Yeah, but it hasn't changed. What it's caused, James, is people to go deeper now underground. That's what's happening. That's why people are fighting this, because there's a policy that says you're mandated to do this.
Why wasn't it brought
Okay,
up 2 years
okay,
ago?
so before we go any further, let's open the can of worms. Let's talk about the elephant in the room, which is and I love them. I say it lovingly, Zillow. So Zillow, Realtor.com, Homes, the three top portals. We won't even rank them because God help us, I'll have to do a whole nother masterclass on that. So no ranking, please. But these are the top three portals. What happens if CCP is repealed in our sort of dystopian universe? Listings don't all go into the MLS. Let's say 30% hypothetically, probably a fair estimate of what'll happen. It's also very luxury market dependent. So, right. But in Miami, Liz, like it would definitely start to happen for sure. I know your market well, right? People will start pulling off. And they'll do whatever. They'll be in-house for some of the larger brokerages, or people will create models of seeing listings differently, and they won't make it out to the big sites. How does Zillow, Realtor, well, maybe not Realtor because they're NAR affiliated. How do these portals react? What do they do? And what is their ramification on us?
Well, if I may start with that, Audrey, because I mean, I've
Do
thought
it.
about the portals, and the reality is they get their data from the MLSs, and because they are now brokers. Well, we have to accept that, and we've all allowed that to happen. But you know, the solution isn't just to change one thing; it's to look at the whole picture, and again, optionality for the consumers. You know, I'm licensed in the state of Texas. Our agents are licensed in the state of Texas. I live in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. I belong to a particular MLS in this area. They do a great job for us. My clients in DFW often want lake homes down in Austin, Texas, in Travis County. I can't show them, I can't easily see those properties because I'm not a member of the Austin MLS. So we talk about data sharing, we talk about access, we talk about consumer availability of data, but yet we've got our own barriers that we put up and we accept and we live with that prevent the actual sharing and being in the best interest of the consumer by making that information available. I just offer that up as one more example of we got to be careful of just making one change and think that that solves the problems, because that doesn't solve all the issues. And we need to be thinking about what the real issues are from the consumer standpoint and making sure that we're addressing their needs.
Good point. Anybody who wants to, I'm not going to dictate.
I'll let Mike go first before I go on my rant.
Okay.
Oh, go ahead, Jane.
That sounds considerate.
We put it.
It's very clear to me what will happen with this. You'll see one of two pivots. You're going to see all these listings, brokers will compete with each other in the same space. And Jeff, I want to apologize. I wasn't calling you out necessarily. I was using your comment as a reference to how the whole industry is doing it, to be clear. You're going to see everybody take their corners, and then they're all going to compete on inventory, and they're going to recruit on inventory. It's going to destroy the marketplace. I think MLSs will go away. That's one path. I mean that not to be clear, I'm not saying all of them, but what will happen is what happens if Compass, EXP, Berkshire Hathaway, all these top brokers start pulling all their inventory, and the MLS only has 40% or 50% of the inventory? It makes it so it's not as relevant. Like, we'll take the marketplace we've spent 20 years building and destroy it. And if we think that homes.com and Zillow are just going to stay there and only have 50% of the inventory, you're out of your mind. What will happen is one of two things. They will either become the de facto MLS, where they'll go back to allowing brokerages and people to upload listings to those portals, which would be awful, because all the problems the consumer had with like duplicate listing entry and stuff not being done
accuracy,
lovingly,
fair housing issues, the quality of the data, not
it turns into shit.
Tax roll.
Like,
it's garbage in, garbage out. Yeah,
it's garbage in, garbage out. The experience goes to crap. Or the second thing that could happen is they go, you know what? We're sick of the stupidity of this industry, and we're just going to go be full-blown brokerage. And you need to watch this, because the company people aren't paying attention to right now is Redfin, and they should be, because Redfin just got away from doing employee-based agents, and now they're doing traditional brokerage called Redfin Next. They're recruiting people. They've got the best portal in real estate. And if Zillow decided with 220 million unique visitors to go you know what? We're going to go take all the teams that are paying us money and bring them over to be Zillow brokerage. That's going to be scary for everyone. Like, the domino effect of what people aren't looking at is they're looking here, but you're not looking 4 years or 5 years down the line, and what the conglomerates would do. They aren't going to sit back and go, we're only going to have 50% of the inventory. They will pivot, and they will pivot hard. And if they did, the very thing the industry has been scared about for 20 years could become reality based upon this decision. Zillow hasn't done any syndication of brokerage direct listings since 2017. They've been MLS specifically since then. I literally talked to Zillow rep this morning. So they get their data from the MLS. There's a number there somewhere where if they don't have enough inventory, they have to pivot their business. And the domino effects could be catastrophic for that. I mean, it'd be great for them, like if that's what everybody wants. But for our industry, I think that we're underestimating what that could be long term. So
I'll tell you, actually, I'll give you a good analogy. I do agree with that statement, and generally about be careful, which is CoStar. I had to say it. If you do an analogy for commercial, right? For commercial listings, there was no centralized database within commercial for listings. CoStar spent 20 years, counting numbers of hundreds of thousands of drivers driving around. Now they drone around, and they have the de facto commercial, listing database.
I was just going to say, I appreciate the forecast in that. I think there's different paths this could easily go down. And the one that I'd like to see is, I think our MLSs provide value. It's the easiest marketing system that is set up for all of us. And I think we need to underscore that. And I think the consumer needs to know what MLS stands for, or come up with a different name, sidebar. But more importantly, I want to see a better policy in place than what's currently in place. What we have in place now does not work for all the agents and all the companies in this country. I don't think people mind sharing. I know there's people out there, and look, we all know who the bad players are. We know who the bad guys are, okay? That'll take a listing, try to double end it to maximize it. They screw the consumer. We know that happens. But when you start putting safeguards in place, like the type I talked about with DocuSign as a company, or SkySlope that we use, for example, it says stop right here and read this, and you can't go any further until you read it. And there's a lapse of time for somebody to read what it actually says about opting out or opting in. We're doing our job for the consumer. And right now we're not. We are letting the consumer down. I don't think we're, it's like somebody put in the chat box, which made sense to me. I read it a minute ago. They said, how do we know what our health plan is, right? How do we know to opt in or opt out? We don't understand all the intricacies of that, but if we still have health insurance, we go through and we sign things, boom, 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 boom. And then we get down to the bottom line and boy, it's not quite what we thought it was, right? And so I think there's a lot of leeway here where NAR needs to be receptive of not a one size fits all. I think it should be much more local than it currently is, because I think James market in Silicon may be different than the market in, I think, New Mexico, where Jeff is. And I think where Liz is, they're completely different markets. Wouldn't
Very different markets.
I love to see our association put out a survey that says, what do you want for a policy that protects all of us, that we can share listings if we opt in, okay? And then have people vote on it, the ones that are participating.
Well, so let me pivot.
People back east in Washington, D.C. next month, on the recommendation of the MLS committee, they're going to vote on it. And I'm like, I don't know who those people are. They don't represent.
Yeah.
I have one representative there or two, maybe.
You might need three. But listen, let me kind of pivot then for the last few minutes of this conversation about sort of what would compromise if this group was on a committee, and I think this group would make an amazing committee. For the record, I was literally thinking, gosh, I appoint all of you to figure out the future. If each of you could go around and pick something that, let's say, the one common theme we're hearing, and in all the articles that I've read and all the people I've spoken to, is that there's room for maybe it to be massaged, it to be tweaked, to be changed. Everybody seems to be open to the fact that it is less than perfect. Okay, so as long as we're not taking extremes in this Halloween election season, and we had to come up with compromise, I'll go around the horn for last minutes and say, what would it look like? And I would encourage the chat people to say what they think it would look like. And I'll throw out one little caveat. I spent a long time talking to my friend who's an agent this weekend. Let's make sure, to your point, that we are making decisions for large numbers of people, right? So whether they're members, agents, consumers, whatever, what benefits the most? Does anybody have any suggestion of one thing that I said to you, you have to come up with one thing that we want to change about this policy that would make it fair and everybody would be okay with that change. And it would just be a little thing that would make it better.
So
Go ahead, Liz.
I think we can do a lot of the things that Mike referred to while still keeping the policy, right? So
there you go. Exactly.
We offer seller opt out. I've talked about that. We offer coming soon. So you can have it out there, but it's not ready to show. You can't publicly advertise it, et cetera, et cetera. And, those things would protect that agent who, you talked about at the beginning, who received a big fine. There's lots of options to take something temporarily off the market. And have a reasonable discussion to protect the members and protect the consumers. So I think that while that is more work for everybody, I think that's work that is worth doing and having everybody participate in.
Okay. And then another comment, one of the comments said, should it just be more clear what it means to advertise your listing? And I do think that's more work for the MLS, right? But you're saying is it just need to be more clear,
What does public marketing mean? Somebody puts a sign up, it's public marketing, I think, but it's just some general term, generic term. Anyway, go ahead, Audrey. I'm sorry.
No, I think you're saying the same thing. You're fine. Keep going. I think you and Liz are saying similar things that,
I have a whole
again,
webpage on it, but we're wrapping up and we've only got a few minutes left. So yes, we have lots of information about what all of those things include, and we make it very clear. But I'm not trying to be reductive about what
but
that
clarity. No, I don't think you're being reductive. I'm trying to come away with some common themes in the last few minutes. And what is very clear is clarity to both the agent and the consumer as to the decisions and choices they're making. And I did think, Mike, I'm sorry, I thought Mike's was fascinating about e-signatures and not reading, and that's sort of because I had this argument with my agent who I did like, and then she's like, it was there, everything was there, and she's a wonderful agent, did a phenomenal job, so there's no issue. But I was thinking about that e-signature component that really facilitates not reading. That's so interesting to me. So,
that
okay,
goes
so,
back to not reading your terms and conditions for anything, right?
oh my
We all
gosh,
agree to terms
totally.
and conditions to, if whether it's an app I downloaded to order a pizza, I'm sure I've agreed to something in there that I didn't want to, but I didn't want to do. I can pick up the phone and call to, or get in my car and drive myself. People need to be responsible for what they agree
100%.
to. And agents, boots on the ground agent, listen, there was a time you sat at the kitchen table and you described to somebody exactly what was in the contract and what they were
Yeah,
signing.
that's true.
And I'll be honest, in some cases, our members have gotten lazy and they're not doing the work and making those explanations, and they should be.
100%. I was a loan officer for 10 years and we sat at the kitchen table and the stack was this high and you had to read every document for them to sign. So other suggestions from Jeff, James, but I think what I got from Mike and Liz, Mike, I don't want to speak for you, but I got his clarity, much more clear, much more detailed, right?
Let me just be really clear about it. I think CCP should be repealed. Okay, and I
Okay.
think it should be replaced with better policies that make sense for today's
Okay.
time and going forward. Technology has changed the way we do business completely. To Liz's point and to James's point, I think we all agree on that. But there's better policies, and let the sellers have a choice. Should they have an opt-in and have some information about what James talks about? Absolutely. I agree with him on that. There should be here's the pros and cons, and you have to read this page. Okay. And I think that's critically important. And I think our digital partners out there need to understand what we're saying, because they're creating liability for us the way they present those forms to people. We've got to slow them down. They've got to initial it, every single paragraph that they must read. I think there has to be some safeguards in. I
Okay.
think sellers should have a choice more than being told what to do by NAR. So
Okay. I want to give everybody else, we're really down to the wire. So I'm gonna let James end. Go ahead, Jeff.
Yeah, so I agree with Mike on his summation there. I think it should be repealed and better policies put into place that address many of these issues and are much more consumer focused. But besides that, though, I think that we're missing some huge opportunities. Technology is changing faster than any of us can ever imagine. I spent 30 years in the tech industry before I got into real estate, and it's just mind-boggling to me. I mean, we all went to bed one night and didn't know really how to spell artificial intelligence, woke up the next day and we can't get away from it. And that's happening faster than any of us imagined. And so I think that the industry, we should be taking the lead on that instead of reacting to what all these prop tech companies are doing. It's bringing technology to the fore that isn't necessarily even aware of what's going on in the real estate industry. So we've got deep pockets and we've got a lot of synergies across the country. It would be really exciting to see us come together, for example, and look at things such as public-private blockchains, things like that actually start to move the industry forward from a technology standpoint and potentially help us address those issues by re-engineering them versus continuing to put band-aids on it. And I just think that's something we need to seriously be looking at.
All right, so final word for James, although I feel frankly you teed him up a little bit about letting technology decide our future. He might go for that one hard, but James, you have the final word.
I mean,
Where to start?
Everybody here has got valid points. I'm not saying CCP is perfect. I've been in all the articles I've said. I think it needs change to it. I haven't really heard, other than the digital signature stuff, exact policy changes that everybody would like to see. Mine is repeal office exclusives. I think a version of CCP or something else, to Mike's point, that accomplishes that is fine. But I'm just going to boil it to this. None of this is going to change because the industry has too many realtors in it that aren't managed. We have too many people trying to do stuff. The reason these policies are here is for the lowest common denominator. And I don't know how you change any of that until brokers stop hiring people that don't know how to do their job. It's not the,
Yeah,
Mike, it's not the
that's true.
MLS's responsibility to explain to a consumer what the MLS is. It's actually our job to explain what the MLS is to people. It's part of what we're supposed to do. And all of this documentation we're talking about exists. And it's just nobody has any time to read it. To Liz's point, all this stuff is there. It's very clear what it is. Nobody reads anything because we're all running around with our hair on fire because the last 2 years real estate market sucked. And as soon as this market turns around, no one's going to have these discussions again because everybody's making money and nobody cares. So it's just, to me, this is just round and round we go. But it all boils down to this industry needs to become more professional. And when we talk about, I think, when we talk about consumers, if we genuinely want to put the consumer first, then all the discussion should be focused around them, and then brokerage and agent policy should come after. But that's not capitalism in America. It'll never happen that way. So there's my pessimism.
I thought that was phenomenal. I think we can all get behind that, actually. There's the 80-20 rule at its best. I think perfectly said as a summation. We are out of time. This was everything I could have hoped for and more. I take my hat off to you. I didn't need to blow my whistle or my flag. The next one in November, just if you're curious, is I think I have a chief economist that I think I've lined up to talk about sort of, because I sat at lunch with her and said, hey, how fast is the market really supposed to come back? Speaking of a tough market, James, how fast is the market supposed to come back when rates cut? Like, how fast are we going to get back to where we don't give a shit anymore, right, James? Because we're swimming in deals. So if you want to know the answer to that, tune into the next masterclass. So, all right, thank you, everybody. Thank you so much. Thank you especially to my panelists. This is a tough topic. You're so respectful. I know everybody is very good friends. We're all having drinks at the bar together, if people we talked about. And I will say this, please. The masterclass is all about finding solutions, and you guys have been so respectful. And that is the forum here that we eschew. And I just very much appreciate your participation in problem solving. So thank you
Thanks, Audrey.
from my heart.
Thank you.
To you guys. Can't promise to wear another cool, stupid outfit next time, though. Maybe. See ya.